It's great to be part of your Festival of Education, and I want to share some thoughts which may be a little bit different from what you're hearing elsewhere, and I hope make it worth your while spending the next 3 or 4 minutes listening to me. So, my name's Geoff Mulgan. I'm currently a professor at University College London. In the past, I've worked in governments, running teams top down for prime ministers in a few countries. I've also been a social entrepreneur, an innovator working from the ground up. And I become more and more struck that something is badly missing in our education and that thing is related to what's missing in our society at the time we need it more than ever. And that is wisdom. We are called Homo sapiens, technically, but as a race, we're not always that wise. At the moment, despite all the scientific knowledge and data and information we have, many of our leaders have been doing absolutely crazy, daft things in the last few years. Definitely not very wise. We can see many nations which are much less wise than the people within them. We can see our social media platforms like Twitter can sometimes spread lies and misinformation much more effectively than they promote thoughtful, deliberative, reflective wisdom. So I think we have a bit of a problem. And the weird thing is that very few schools or universities see it as their responsibility to solve this problem. How many of them actually cultivate wisdom deliberately in their students in a way that perhaps they might have done 1,000, 2,000 years ago when that was seen as the central task of education. So I've been looking at what can be done to make wisdom perhaps a bit more graspable, a bit more something we can learn as a habit. And I found that a crucial thing is breaking free from some of the stereotypes we have of wisdom. The idea it's all about a man sitting on a mountain top or in a cave away from the rest of humanity, uttering the occasional elliptical observation. There are great insights in the world's wisdom traditions, but some things we need now are a bit different from that. So here's a few examples and how they could be incorporated into the life of a school or a university. The first key to wisdom is realizing that it's essentially a loop. You best become wise by thinking about what you expect to happen, perhaps in your life, your relationships, perhaps in global affairs, observing what actually happens and then refining the way you think, your models, your understanding in the light of reality. This is such an obvious point, but it's incredibly rare in many of our institutions to do that kind of loop thinking, and it's quite hard work in our own lives. But being much more explicit about it is the key to really becoming wise about different things, wise about, say, love or money or academia or science or business success and so on. Secondly, wisdom has to involve multiplicity, seeing things from multiple angles, looking at a tree and seeing not just its biology and its sap and its photosynthesis, but also perhaps its meanings, its culture, its relationships with other trees, or looking at COVID and seeing it not just as a health epidemic, but a problem of economics and society and loneliness and politics and global cooperation as well. As part of that, we have to learn the habits of thinking ethically, with ethics as part of reasoning. So when you ask what is the right thing to do, this is an ethical question. It's not just the correct answer technically, but what will be right for me or you or our ancestors or strangers is vital as a habit of thinking. And many of the cleverest minds of the last 2 or 3 decades, particularly in the digital industries, simply lacked that habit of thinking ethically about what they were doing and so made some terribly bad mistakes. Next, we need to see wisdom as something as much collective as individual. You may be incredibly wise in your head, but you'll be much wiser in a team, in a group with others, tapping your collective intelligence. And much of what we need to become much better at is the forms of meetings and collaboration, which really do that well. And in those meetings, as in your head, one of the routes to wisdom is having arguments. Not just quietly coming to a point of view, but consciously interrogating different options, seeing their strengths and weaknesses, not being shy about doing that in a group. It's what makes some of the best sports teams and music groups really good, is their willingness to have ferocious arguments about what the right course of action is, but without their egos involved. And then we need an integrative way of thinking. Ours is an era where things are so much more connected than in the past, our biosphere, our cyberspace, our lives. And so we need habits of mind which think in multiple dimensions simultaneously, see how the ecological, the social, the economic, the engineering all intersect, and can think holistically. That is perhaps the key to wisdom. And I hope that some of the things I've just talked about become absolutely mainstream for any school, not just secondary, but also primary schools, for universities, and that we increasingly design our big institutions, the UN, parliaments, governments, so they bring out the greatest collective wisdom of the society, and not the least. And there's an urgency to doing this. Many of the trends right now are going in the wrong direction, not the right direction. They are dumbing down, dampening wisdom, not amplifying it. And that makes it much less likely that we will solve our really big shared problems in the next few years, whether it's in carbon and climate change, or learning to live with very powerful artificial intelligence. So that's why this is not a theoretical question. This is the most intensely practical question facing education across the world right now. How can we cultivate a practical, applied wisdom, which means we have billions of people well suited for solving the problems of the years ahead? And hopefully that makes some sense to you, and hopefully maybe you're already part of the solution. Thank you.